morning is a moment filled with possibility, an invitation to begin again. In the quiet of the dawn, before the world rushes into its endless demands, there lies a space, an opportunity to seek guidance. It is in this first act of the day that we ground ourselves not in our own plans, but in the wisdom that transcends our own understanding. Each morning offers us a fresh start, an opportunity to shape the day ahead and guide the course of our actions. It is the quiet threshold between yesterday's burdens and tomorrow's uncertainties. In the stillness of the early hours, before the noise and haste of the world begin to intrude, there is a moment of pure potential. This moment, however brief, presents us with the unique choice of how to begin the day. This is not simply a matter of waking up and going through the motions. It is an intentional act, a decision that determines not only the physical actions we will take, but the inner posture we will adopt as we face the world. We all know the sensation of waking up tired or distracted, perhaps overwhelmed by the weight of what lies ahead. Yet, each morning, we are given an opportunity to reset. We stand at the beginning of an entirely new day with the power to orient ourselves towards something greater than our own efforts or ambitions. This is the moment to seek guidance. The key is in the decision to seek wisdom before we begin the day's work, not as an afterthought or a final resort, but as the first and most vital act of the morning. It is easy in the rush of life to overlook this moment of reflection. The pull of daily responsibilities, work, families, social obligations can overshadow the quieter, more contemplative parts of the morning. We may rush to check our phones, dive into emails, or get caught up in the mental checklist of tasks ahead. Yet, when we forgo this moment of stillness and intentional seeking, we risk walking through the day disconnected from the deeper wisdom available to us. And so we must ask ourselves, how do we begin our mornings? How do we prepare ourselves mentally and spiritually to meet the day? The first act of each day should not be driven by the urgency of task, but by the quiet desire to align ourselves with a direction and purpose that transcends our individual efforts. This is where seeking God's guidance comes in. When we start the day by placing our intentions before God, we invite a deeper wisdom into our lives. This morning practice is more than a ritual or habit. It helps us to set aside our anxieties. This morning pause is not merely about asking for guidance in terms of the tasks we will face that day, though that is certainly part of it. It is also about seeking wisdom on a deeper level, guidance for how we will engage with others, how we will respond to challenges, how we will move through the day with humility, grace, and a sense of purpose. We may have a clear sense of what we want to accomplish, but asking for guidance shifts our focus from our own abilities to the broader divine perspective on the events we will encounter. In seeking God's guidance each morning, we are reminded that we do not walk alone. Life is often full of questions, doubt. This is why it is so important. We might ask, how do we begin? How do we seek this guidance? It starts with a simple intentional act of prayer. In this prayer, we are not merely asking for things to go our way or for personal success, but for clarity, for wisdom, for understanding. We ask for insight into the challenges we will face, for discernment in the choices we must make, and for the strength to act in alignment with our higher purpose. The act of praying in the morning is not a request for an easy day, but rather an acknowledgement that, regardless of what may come, we cannot face it alone. The guidance we seek is not simply in our successes, but in how we approach each moment, each decision, with a heart open to God's wisdom. Sometimes the guidance we seek may not come immediately or in ways we expect. It may be subtle, a quiet prompting, an inner peace, a sense of calm amidst confusion. Other times it may come through a conversation with a friend, through a passage of scripture, or even in an unexpected moment of clarity. This is the beauty of seeking guidance. It is not always about receiving direct answers, but about becoming attuned to a deeper truth that shapes our actions and responses throughout the day. When we begin our day by seeking guidance, we are setting an intention the way we will approach the challenges ahead. We may not know exactly what lies in store, but we can trust that we will be equipped to handle it. The act of seeking guidance allows us to approach the day with a sense of peace, knowing that we are not relying solely on our own strength or understanding, but on a divine source of wisdom that transcends all human limitation. This practice of seeking guidance each morning is a continual reminder that we are not isolated individuals navigating the world in isolation, but part of something far greater. And when we do this, we find not only the wisdom we seek, but also the strength to face the day with courage, humility, and grace. It is important to remember that seeking guidance is not a one-time act, but a daily practice. Just as we need nourishment for our bodies each day, so too do we need spiritual sustenance each morning to sustain us through the day's challenges. The choice to seek God's guidance in the morning is not a one-time decision, but an ongoing discipline. Each morning, we must choose to prioritize this moment of stillness and reflection before the busyness of the day takes over. It is a choice to start the day with intention, to begin each moment grounded in the wisdom and peace that comes from God's guidance. In the end, the act of seeking guidance each morning is not just about asking for help. It is about aligning ourselves with a higher purpose and opening our hearts to the possibilities of the day. It is about embracing the unknown with confidence, trusting that we are walking not on our own. Seeking God's guidance is an act of great strength, though it may appear to some as a sign of weakness or dependence. In a world that prizes independence and self-reliance, it can be difficult to acknowledge that we are not capable of navigating life's complexities on our own. Yet the reality is that we are all constantly faced with decisions, dilemmas, and in these moments, seeking divine guidance. When we choose to seek God's guidance, we acknowledge the limits of our own perception. We recognize that while we may possess skills, knowledge, and experiences, they are finite and incomplete. No matter how much we learn or how much wisdom we accumulate, it reminds us that we do not need to rely solely on our finite vision, but can trust in a greater, eternal perspective that sees all things and knows the way forward. Seeking guidance is not a sign of failure or helplessness, but rather a demonstration of humility and strength. It requires us to set aside our pride, to admit that we do not have all the answers, and to place our trust in something beyond ourselves. The strength that comes from seeking guidance is not the strength of self-sufficiency, but the strength that comes from surrendering to a higher wisdom that leads us to the best path. There is a profound power in the realization that we do not have to figure everything out on our own. When we seek guidance, we are tapping into a source of wisdom that is always available, always present, and infinitely reliable. Whether it comes in the form of quiet whispers in our hearts, the words of a friend, or the clarity found in Scripture, divine guidance is a constant companion to those who choose to seek it. The strength that emerges from this guidance is not based on control, but on trust. Trust that, even in the most uncertain or challenging moments, we are not left to navigate life alone. Moreover, the strength found in seeking guidance also leads us to live more courageously. When we know that we are not relying on our own limited understanding, but on divine wisdom, we can move forward with greater confidence, even when the way ahead seems unclear. It may seem counterintuitive, but in acknowledging our weakness and dependence on God, we are able to walk through the day with the assurance that whatever may come, we are guided by a wisdom that is far greater than our own. Seeking guidance also protects us from making decisions driven solely by emotion or impulse. We live in a world that often pushes us to act quickly, to make decisions in haste, or to respond in the heat of the moment. However, decisions made without guidance often lead to regret or confusion. When we seek divine wisdom, we allow space for reflection, for prayer, and for the stillness that brings clarity. This pause, though it may seem like an act of restraint, is actually an act of strength. It takes strength to wait, to listen, and to allow God to guide our steps, rather than rushing forward with decisions that might later turn out to be missteps. By seeking guidance, we also become more attuned to the needs and struggles of others. When we approach life with humility, acknowledging that we do not have all the answers, we become more compassionate and open to the wisdom that others have to offer. We are less likely to be swayed by our own ego or desires, and more likely to be present for others in a meaning. This deeper connection to those around us enriches our relationships and deepens our understanding of the world, making us stronger and more empathetic. In the end, the strength in seeking guidance comes not from knowing everything or controlling every aspect of our lives, but from the humility to trust in the wisdom that is offered to us. When we acknowledge our need for God's direction, we tap into a source of strength and peace that enables us to move forward with confidence. It is in this surrender. To seek God's guidance is, in many ways, an act of deep humility. It begins with the recognition that we, as human beings, are limited in our understanding, our perspectives, and our ability to navigate life's challenges on our own. This is not a weakness, but a profound strength. The strength to acknowledge our own limitations and to turn to a higher wisdom for direction. It is the understanding that while we have our own desires, spiritual skills, and experiences, we are not the ultimate authority in our lives. And it is in this posture of humility that we open ourselves to receive guidance that far surpasses our own comprehension. The world often encourages us to be self-sufficient, to trust our own abilities and to rely on our own judgment. These qualities are not inherently wrong. After all, self-reliance and independence have their place. But when it comes to the weightier decisions of life, those moments when the path is unclear, the stakes are high, and the choices are complex, our own understanding can only take us so far. We are finite beings. Humility in seeking guidance does not mean passivity or inaction. On the contrary, it requires an active willingness to surrender our need for control and a trust in a wisdom that is greater than our own. To seek guidance is to admit that we cannot do it alone, and that there is something far beyond our own thinking that can provide the clarity and insight we need. It is a step toward releasing our grip on the illusion of control and allowing ourselves to be led, to be shaped, and to be directed by a wisdom that is not of our own making. This process of seeking guidance requires that we quiet the noise of the world around us and listen attentively to the voice of God. In a world filled with constant distractions, our phones, our busy schedules, our responsibilities, it can be challenging to find the space to truly listen. Humility allows us to create this space, to set aside our own plans and desires, and to open ourselves to hear what God is saying. Seeking guidance is also about setting aside our own ego and desires. Our egos often have a way of clouding our judgment, pushing us to make decisions based on what we want, what feels right in the moment, or what will bring us immediate satisfaction. But when we approach life with humility, we recognize that our desires and impulses are not always aligned with what is truly best for us. Humility calls us to set aside our own plans and submit them to God's will, trusting that He knows what is best, even when we cannot fully understand it. It is a trust that goes beyond our own desires and understanding, a trust that says, "Not my will, but yours be done." The act of seeking guidance is not just about asking for answers, but about seeking the right posture of heart and mind. It is about coming before God with a willingness to listen, to learn, and to follow. Humility requires that we not only ask for guidance, but that we also have the courage to follow it, even when it leads us down paths we may not have chosen for ourselves. There is often a tension between our own desires and what God may ask of us, and it is in this tension that humility is most tested. It is easy to ask for guidance when we are already comfortable with the direction we want to go. But true humility is revealed when we must surrender our own plans in favor of God. In seeking God's guidance, humility also enables us to trust in the timing of His answers. Sometimes the guidance we seek does not come immediately or in the way we expect. There may be silence, there may be waiting, or we may not receive a clear answer right away. In these moments, humility requires us to trust that God's timing is perfect, even when it feels like we are in limbo or facing uncertainty. We must trust that the wisdom we seek will come when we need it most, and that God is always present. The act of seeking God's guidance also strengthens our relationship with Him. It deepens our dependence on Him, not just in moments of crisis, but in the everyday choices and challenges we face. When we make a habit of seeking God's wisdom, we come to rely on Him more fully. Our dependence on His guidance becomes a constant thread that runs through our lives, allowing us to draw closer to Him with each decision we make. This relationship is not based on a transactional view of God, where we ask for guidance only when we need something, but on a relational view, where we seek to align ourselves with His will at all times. Through this, we begin to see more clearly the way God works in our lives and the ways in which He is guiding us toward His purposes. Humility also invites us to surrender our desire for immediate answers or solutions. God's guidance may not always come in the form of direct, step-by-step instructions. Sometimes His wisdom is subtle, unfolding over time as we continue to seek Him and remain faithful in the process. Humility helps us to embrace the journey, knowing that even in the midst of uncertainty, we are moving in the right direction, as long as we are seeking God's will. We may not always see the whole picture, but humility allows us to trust that God is leading us step by step, and that each moment of guidance, no matter how small, is part of a greater plan. In the end, humility in seeking guidance is not about being passive or weak. It is about acknowledging our need for God and submitting ourselves to His wisdom. It is the strength to release our need for control and the courage to follow the path that He sets before us, even when it challenges our own desires or understanding. It is the willingness to trust in His timing and to listen attentively for His voice, knowing that in His guidance we find the wisdom, clarity, and peace that we could never find on our own. Seeking God's guidance is not just a passive request for answers, but an active and deliberate engagement that requires both faith and action. When we ask for direction, we are not simply waiting for divine intervention to solve our problems or make decisions for us. Instead, we are aligning ourselves with a higher purpose and trusting that the wisdom we seek will shape not just our understanding but also our action. Faith, the act, it calls for a deep trust that, even when we don't fully understand why a particular direction is being suggested, we are still meant to follow. This is where faith and action converge. The faith required to act on the guidance we receive can often be uncomfortable. We might feel unequipped or uncertain, and at times the choice to follow the guidance feels contrary to our instincts or desires. It can feel like a leap of faith, one that requires us to step away from what we know and embrace what is not yet clear. But it is in these moments of uncertainty that we grow in our trust and in our ability to rely not on our own understanding, but on God's wisdom. To follow the guidance of God is to take the next step in faith, knowing that He will provide clarity along the way. In many ways, this process mirrors the journey of a child learning to trust and follow the instructions of a parent. A child may not understand why they are being told to take a particular action, but they trust the parent's wisdom and experience. Similarly, we may not always understand why God directs us in a certain way, but if we trust in His love for us and His desire for our good, we can follow the guidance given with confidence. The trust we place in God is not based on our understanding, but on his faithfulness and his perfect vision for our lives. Action, however, is not a one-time response to receiving guidance. This is a dynamic relationship, not a one-time event, where we constantly return to God for further clarity, refinement, and strength to carry out what he has set before us. There is also a deeper peace that comes with acting on God's guidance. The anxiety and confusion that often accompany difficult decisions dissipate when we fully entrust our actions to God. We may not have all the answers, but we can have confidence in knowing that we are acting in accordance with the wisdom and direction that he provides. There is a comfort in trusting that even when the path ahead is difficult, we are moving in the right direction, with God leading us every step of the way. The key to acting on God's guidance lies in the willingness to obey. Obedience is not simply about following rules or fulfilling obligations, but about recognizing that God's will is ultimately the best for us and for those around us. The act of obedience is rooted in trust, and it is through this trust that we find true freedom and peace. As we act on the guidance we receive, we become more attuned to God's will, more responsive to his voice, and more confident in our ability to follow him wherever he leads. Seeking guidance and acting on it, then, is an ongoing process that requires both faith and action, a continual surrender of our desires and plans in favor of God's greater purpose. When we move forward in this way, we find not only the wisdom and direction we seek, but also a deeper relationship with the one who leads us. This relationship transforms us, strengthens us, and equips us to live out his will in the world. It is through acting on his guidance that we experience the fullness of life and the fulfillment of his plans for us.